Hello, I'm Howie Shareff, and welcome to another You Call This Yoga internet TV show, where we discuss accessible yoga and the many ways that yoga can be practiced without having to do a lot of asana or flowing kind of movements. What that means is that yoga doesn't always have to be a physical practice in an overt sense. We could be practicing using our brains, our hearts, our intentions, and subtle elements of poses without having to do a lot of bending and twisting. Last week, we spoke with Marcy Braverman Goldstein about Sanskrit, the sounds of words, and how they have meaning. So we're getting a little cerebral with our yoga practice. Today, we're going to go a little deeper into the concept of yoga as a stress management tool. Our guest today, who is very near and dear to me, is my wife, Dr. Barbara Vosk. We've been married over 30 years, and she's had the opportunity to manage stress in a variety of ways, as you can imagine. We have adult children and have experienced raising them, which in itself can be a stressor. Therefore, I've got to watch Barbara manage stress by being married to me, as well as all the other stuff that comes around in life. We'll bring Barbara on in just a moment. This is an interactive show, and we do hope that you engage us. You can Skype in at Computers 2K Voice. You can phone in at 919-518-9773. Or you can log in on the Nissan Communications page, put in your name, and you can type in the box. We'll respond as soon as we can. You can also email me where it says contact below. We also have the luxury and privilege of having a sponsor for our show, Neomond Deli and Catering. We'll share their good health tip later on in the show. But the highlight is to bring on Barbara Vosk. Barbara's been a psychologist in private practice for over 30 years, as well as a yoga teacher for over 7 years. Let's bring on Barbara, who will share some of her history into how she became interested in psychology and how she's been noticing how people manage their stress years ago and how it's evolved. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, Howie. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's quite a pleasure. As anyone can imagine, when a husband and wife get together to do something, there could be special chemistry.
Yes, let's see how that special chemistry shows up today.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, it's been an adventure. Fortunately, we don't do this very often because it has been an adventure in self-management. Barbara, tell me, how did you first get interested in psychology and dealing with people?
It's such an interesting question, Howie. Sometimes I think that I developed my psychological acumen by riding the subway into high school when I lived in New York City, and just became really skilled at looking around and trying to see what people looked safe to stand next to and who might be sort of creepy and stay away from, and just sort of picking up the vibes of the folks around me. I think I've always been interested in people and helping people, and majored in psychology in college and worked for a psychology professor after I graduated, and then attended graduate school and just found that that became my passion, was really to work very closely and intimately with people and trying to help them work through problems.
Mm-hmm. And working through problems can evoke all sorts of emotions in the process, such as just shutting down and being absolutely quiet and removed, to the realm of being very anxious and frenetic. So, in your early years of private practice, before you became versed in yoga and eventually a yoga teacher, how were the tools available for therapists in those early years, let's say 20 to 30 years ago?
Well, early on in my career, I went to a very behavioral program and learned a technique called progressive muscle relaxation. The idea of relaxing the body to help manage stress really goes back into the 50s. So that was one tool that was used to help stress, was actually helping people learn how to go through their entire body, go through a body scan, and relax the individual muscle groups to help them relax more. In addition, just talking through problems. I think primarily psychologists are about helping people explore feelings and thoughts and the ways our thinking minds can also contribute to stress. So basic therapy where people are identifying issues around them, learning how to manage their thoughts and reactions to them is another way that traditional psychotherapy or psychology helps people work through stress or manage their stress better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in that time period also, we had our children being born and their early development. I know for me that was a significant stressor because I had mixed feelings about parenthood and giving up my individuality, and I wasn't particularly skilled in being a parent. I didn't have the biology that a mother would have in terms of nurturing. So for me, I found that managing my stress was a continuous process. I would go play ball, I would find ways to engage other people, as well as trying to engage you, Barbara, as well as our peers. But I can imagine early on, in terms of raising a family and having a spouse who might have different opinions, that that could cause a little stress in the relationship. How did, if you don't mind sharing, how did you manage dealing with me and raising a family?
Now you ask? No.
It's over the bridge.
Well, I'm going to take the clock back a little bit. When I was in graduate school, that was probably the most stressful experience of my life up until that time. And I started running very actively. And around that time, there was a lot of research being done to demonstrate the impact of regular exercise on mood. So for me, I found that very vigorous exercise, running, moving, as opposed to more quiet stretching like yoga, that was a really great way for me to manage stress. And so even when our kids were young, you may remember I was waking up really early to make sure I could get some exercise in because it really felt like it helped my mental health a great deal.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we could say that whether you're a yoga teacher, practitioner, or non-practitioner, that movement could be an integral part of stress management.
Well, I think more and more we're discovering that movement is essential to help us manage all sorts of things, especially as we become more sedentary as a culture with our little devices in front of our faces. We're really recognizing the importance of people reconnecting with their bodies. And I'm so thrilled that my profession has also discovered the importance of these mind-body techniques. And we've learned that while it can be helpful to use our minds to understand things that are happening inside of us and our bodies, it's also, which we can call top-down interventions, it's also very helpful sometimes just to start with the body and moving more from the bottom up. So there absolutely is truth in the fact that engaging the body can impact mood and mind.
And do you believe that this body engagement has to be aerobic and sweat inducing? Can it be a mild form of exercise? Because we have a lot of participants with our organization in the country who have some physical challenges and may not be able to move so readily. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are absolutely, we do not need to be moving rapidly and readily to engage our mood. And I learned as I've gotten older and gotten away from those more active aerobic exercises that, in fact, the quieter practices, learning how to breathe, how to rest, that's the kind of yoga I teach, is restorative yoga. These are fabulous ways to help people engage the opposite of the stress response, to engage the rest and relax response.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite true that there is an array of ways to manage our mood and our stress, but it certainly does not only have to be active. And I think especially across the lifespan, it just makes more sense that we expand our range of what we do and find ways to do it that take better care of our bodies. I can't do at my age what I did when I was a graduate student at 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to, but I can't.
Well, you still do a fair amount quite gracefully and effectively.
Thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome. I've got to observe just a few times. So in the early 2000s, both of us had been in yoga practice. I had been doing a lot of lay around, look like I was doing nothing yoga, which eventually led to our organization's name, You Call This Yoga. And you had been more involved in vinyasa kind of practices. And we had a disparity in terms of how we viewed yoga. How do you recommend people start to transition from the aerobic vinyasa kind of program to an initiation of stress reduction without being so frenetic?
How do you begin? I guess you first begin with the intention of wanting to stretch into doing something new and different. You know, at the end of even the most vigorous class, there is the resting pose Shavasana, which teachers often cite as the most important pose. It's a way for the body to integrate the benefits of the practice. So recognizing that we need this balance of active and less active, and perhaps begin by taking a gentler class or even practicing resting and breathing deeply and slowly in your own home, and just noticing how that can help. You know, sometimes when we're very stressed, it's hard to go from going to sitting and being still. So, for example, in the anxiety relief workshop series that Jen Davis and I developed, sometimes we have folks do some very gentle, slow movements paired with breath that can at least get the body engaged and settled a little bit, and then move into the more still, quiet postures of restorative yoga, where deep benefits for stress relief lie.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. So teachers, if you'd like to invite more stress management into your program, we can do that in small pieces, possibly extending Shavasana or adding more breathing into the practice. And for participants, can you slow your breathing down? Can you observe what your body is experiencing more readily by focusing on the body? And for non-participants, can you start to focus on your breathing a little bit more and just notice what might happen if you change your breathing pattern? We've talked about stress, and we all experience stress, which can be healthy or unhealthy. And I'll ask Barbara to give us a little more background about what the stress response is and why it's important that we pay attention to it. What are your thoughts?
Well, our stress response is a basic biological response that is absolutely essential to our survival. It lives in the back of the brain. It's out of our conscious control. It's a function of the autonomic nervous system. And most of us think of it as fight, flight, or freeze. So when we are stressed in a very powerful way. For example, if we think we're going to get hit by a car, immediately our nervous system leaps into action, and stress hormones run through the body, and our muscles tighten and engage for movement, and our concentration narrows, our digestion shuts down, and we are poised for action. This is a response that lives in the animal kingdom. This is essential for our survival. But we humans have this big front part of our brain which helps us think about things, which is a good thing, but sometimes we can create stress for ourselves by, for example, sitting in a traffic jam. And we can have that exact same response as if we were actually in physical danger. So for people who are experiencing high stress responses, or more significantly, chronic stress, these ongoing stressors of life that can absolutely pile on, then the muscles and the nervous system are engaged in that very high level of arousal all the time. So one of the most powerful ways to start to shift out of fight, flight, and freeze response is, in fact, to engage the breath differently, what you were just talking about, Howie. And many of us don't think about how we breathe. So just beginning to bring attention to your breath and inviting the breath to slow down and having an even pace of the inhale and the exhale starts to make the nervous system turn from fight and flight to rest, restore, and digest. The breath is that powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can appreciate your reference because I do get a little agitated when in traffic, as you may have noticed over the last 40 years. And
Once or twice I've noticed that.
Yes, only once or twice. Fortunately, we don't ride together a lot. And I've come to appreciate that over the years, and more recently even, that I'm taking a more chillax approach to being in traffic and not looking to divert my path as quickly. Because often it's more that we want to keep moving as opposed to the objective is that we'll probably get there in about the same amount of time. So let's consider the idea that there are ways that we could start to ground ourselves with our first pearl of wisdom, where Barbara will share some perspectives on grounding.
When we're stressed, our attention is often focused in the future, worrying about something that may or may not happen. So one good way to manage stress is to bring your to the present. And one of the best ways I know to do that is present tense through present sense. Naming things, hear, smell, feel. Our senses are always happening in the present. So I see the camera in front of me, I see the picture on the wall, I hear the birds outside and the cars going by. I smell the toast that I made this morning and the coffee, and I feel my feet on the floor and my shoulder blades against the back of the chair. Present tense through present senses.
That's very helpful about staying in the present. We apologize for any little blips in our audio. It seemed fine before, but no stress about that. I think that you've gotten the sense of staying in the present and noticing what's around you. Barbara, do you have other tips for folks to be able to ground in terms of their senses?
Sure. One of my favorite ways is really to feel your feet on the floor. You know, think of grounding as connecting with the earth below you. And so often we are disconnected from our bodies. So grounding feet, and just as I said in that little video, to feel yourself sitting, let me try that again. Sitting in the chair, shoulder blades engaged, is one way of grounding. Another way is to slow the breath down. And because we often have very busy minds, it can really help to As one yoga teacher I saw, Amy Weintraub, said, give the mind a bone to chew on and count the breath. So if you count the inhale, maybe for 4 counts, 2, 3, 4, and then count the exhale for 4 counts, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're inviting an even breath rhythm, which will help you feel a little more calm and connected to your body, which is another way of grounding.
Excellent. We both have careers, mine more in the yoga nonprofit realm, where I'm trying to create happy experiences for lots of folks. And Barbara, who as a psychotherapist is helping folks to manage a lot of the traumas and challenges in their life. We wind up having different experiences throughout the day. Barbara gets hers delivered to her, and I'm going out exploring where we could be of benefit. But in each of those realms, there's stress experiences out there. For my population, it could be more the physical and some of the emotional that is a consequence of that. And Barbara's might have a whole lot more of the emotional behind it with some physical manifestations. Either way, it's still a stressful experience for our partners who we're managing. For myself, going out into the world, I find that the stressors are the ones that I create by creating deadlines that might be excessive in terms of meeting them promptly or with quality. And for me, I'm just constantly reminding myself that this is what I choose and that it's okay because I have a part of the control in the matter. I'm doing something by choice. But I'll ask Barbara, how do we invite people who are dealing with chronic situations that can keep their stress mechanism highly charged? How do you engage them in a way to invoke comfort?
Well, I was just doing some research on this in terms of responses to trauma. And our first, in addition to fight and flight and freeze, there's this other response that we humans really need to rely on when we're very stressed, and it's the social engagement response. This is Porges' theory, polyvagal theory, for those of you who like to know the names of things. And basically, I think one of the best ways to manage stress, because we tend to clench and go inside, is to try to connect somewhere with someone. So when people come to see a therapist, that's one way that the stress starts to shift almost immediately, is when they feel heard and understood. So if you can find someone in your neighborhood, in your family, in your friendship circle, in your spiritual circle, to be there for you when you're chronically stressed, that's one way of engaging a relaxation response. Beyond that, I think the things we're speaking about, trying to find ways to relax your physical body. When you're living with chronic stress, you tend to clench and tighten up. And so this is partly where the movements of yoga paired with breath can be so helpful, because you're starting to make a little space in the physical body. Even our ribs get tight, our shoulders get tight, and we can't even get that deeper breath because the muscles are so constricted. So once again, the bottom-up movement of the body, moving body in ways that invite softening and releasing of tension, can help the stress response diminish. And as we've said repeatedly, and this is the essence of yoga, is this breath response, this movement with breath, or for more experienced practitioners, simply to work with the breath in different ways to help manage the stress response. I think all of those ways.
So for teachers, consider the idea of integrating more breath work into the classes or your programming. And for students, I'll invite you to consider your foot positioning, your hand positioning, even how your buns are positioned on the chair? Are you slouching forward? Or are you pushing your buns down too to give you a little bit of lift? All this physical engagement can help bring you into the present as opposed to the potential of dwelling on the future that doesn't exist yet. I know for me and my physical challenges that I've experienced over the years, I've been constantly trying to align my body just to reduce some of the chronic tightening that I experience. Some of our earlier pearls involved feet, bun, shoulder, and hand position. So I'll invite you to visit our other pearls that are on our other shows that you can visit by clicking on the demand prompt on the left side of the screen at another time. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, we'd love for you to Skype in. Computers 2K Voice for Skype, 919-518-9773 for phone. You can join the chat box and log in, type us in a message or comment. And eventually after the show, we'd like you to rate the show. But we're going to get ready for our sponsor spot, which is Neomond Deli and Catering. Neomond is a friend of You Call This Yoga. They're our first year-round sponsor. That was a big deal that was culminated this past week. They're supporting us at Yoga Fest NC, Yoga Fest Raleigh, and our TV show. So I hope, viewers, that you'll get used to the idea of delicious food tips coming, because here comes a special salad from Neomond.
Sally with Neomond, and this is the Neomond Minute. This week we're going to teach you how to make the mixed green and blood orange salad. The salad is very easy to make, and you can get some of the ingredients right here at our Neomond market, such as Lebanese olive oil, Valbresso sheep milk feta cheese, salt, black pepper, grain mustard, and white vinegar, and the zest of 1 blood orange. Mixed greens, we can also add some red onion. I've squeezed 1 blood orange, and to it I've added a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Add a tablespoon of white vinegar, a teaspoon of salt, and about a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and 1 teaspoon of grain mustard. We're getting ready to whisk our salad dressing, but before we do that, we're going to need to add our orange zest. And there you have it, our mixed green with blood orange salad. And don't forget to come by Neomond and pick up some of these ingredients to make this wonderful, delicious salad.
Well, I don't have the ingredients with me to show you on the screen, but you can go to neomond.com and find the ingredients from this delicious blood orange salad. Some of the special ingredients there are the feta cheese and the olive oil. I know that we eat there a fair amount, and I love the salads. But let's get back to this other salad in our mind called stress. We have Dr. Barbara Vosk, clinical psychologist and RYT 500, who does programs with Jen Davis and soon on her own on managing anxiety with yoga, as well as teaching trauma-sensitive yoga. Barbara, can you share some of the programs that you have produced and participated in?
Sure, Howie. Soon after I finished my yoga teacher training back in 2011, Jen Davis, who was a little more experienced than I, approached me about developing a program for folks with anxiety. And she thought it'd be really helpful to integrate the understanding of what's happening in the body and the mind when we're anxious and the ways that yoga can help, really helping folks, because especially anxious folks like to understand how things work, I think. I'm one of those, so I know all about that. Helping them understand why these yoga poses, why these breathing practices could actually help them. And so since that time, we've probably done this program maybe 10 times in the form of 3-hour workshops, or now it's a 4-class workshop series where people are invited to this, again, this understanding, but also this practice of gentle movements and restorative yoga, these resting poses that invite the body to fully relax, with the idea that over those 4 weeks they can cultivate and develop a home practice. Because really, yoga works when we do it. And as Jen often quotes in our workshop series, it has a half-life of a day. So after a day, the benefits of what you've done are gone, which is why doing this on a regular basis can be so helpful. And one of the other little pearls from our workshop is the concept of neuroplasticity, which is by doing practices, we start to change the brain, the pathways in the brain that wire together, fire together. And so the more we practice this relaxation response, the more our body actually learns how to become more efficient at doing it. So that's a pretty exciting process that we've done, and the classes are usually very well received. And when we have that class series in January, it's almost always full. It's sort of that post-holiday, oh my gosh, how do I deal? So it's been really a joy to offer that to people. Currently, I'm getting ready to do my first round of teaching concepts of trauma-sensitive yoga. I participated in a 20-hour training with David Emerson, who's going to be on the show in April, learning about that. But really, it was treating trauma survivors and finding myself limited in how far they could get that led me to become a yoga teacher many years ago.
Yes, and it's fascinating to see how the program that you and Jen have developed is evolving. The content is getting clearer and yet simpler at the same time. I can appreciate that teachers can benefit from this training because it's also stressful to be a teacher, try to manage one's business if they're trying to be someone who lives off of being a yoga teacher. That itself can be a stress-inducing experience. For students who have come to your workshops, they might be coming from a variety of backgrounds too. Could you talk about who might be attending these workshops that you and Jen have put on, and any other thoughts for teachers in regards to them?
It's really quite a range. We've had several couples. We've had experienced yogis. My favorite is that we've had folks that are brand new to yoga, often some who are referred by their therapist, because I market this program to psychotherapists. So quite a range of people show up.
Mm-hmm.
And back to what I was saying before, I think one of the benefits of the workshop series is also that group capacity, that so many people have said, boy, it's nice to know I'm not alone in dealing with these struggles. And in addition to the poses and the practices, we also encourage people to do some self-study, which is one of the limbs of yoga. Learning about oneself, recognizing, gosh, what are the things that make me anxious, and what are the thoughts that go along with that, and what do I think about myself, and what would I like to think about myself? So really inviting that inner study. So it's really appropriate for all sorts of folks.
Mm-hmm. Just the idea of going to a yoga class can be stress-inducing, especially for the less familiar, who might foster judgments about themselves as if they're not capable, they're going to stand out, they don't want to make mistakes. What thoughts do you have for newbies or even experienced yogis who might be going to new studios or classes? How can we foster relaxation when something, even as what we think is a yoga class, can cause stress?
Well, I love the idea of meeting ourselves where we are. And again, it's normal to feel a little stressed when we're doing something new. And stress and excitement are really close cousins of the same physiological response. I think if you're nervous upon going to a new studio, approach the teacher. I had that happen on Sunday, and it was delightful. And I could see that people relaxed just in being greeted warmly and And then it cues the teacher in that, okay, this person may need a little extra assistance. And most yoga teachers are just delighted to offer that in a class. And you don't need to have the right clothing. I mean, to do yoga, you can be wearing comfortable sweatpants and a t-shirt. So you don't have to dress the part. It's really about how to be as comfortable as you can be in your body.
That's a wonderful thought. I know that I have pretty high level of ease in my body, yet I also know that new situations can be evocative of my stress response. I find for me that I am pausing, taking a breath, and being focused on the present because the future doesn't exist yet. At least I like to operate with that sense. What other cues might teachers and students have besides breathing to help them ground? Are there more pearls dangling out there? Anything that comes to mind before we go to our next video?
Well, I think sometimes even physically putting your hands on your own body, right? Putting your hands on your thighs if you're seated. It's a connection. Or if you're lying down, putting a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly. Then you feel your own body, feel the breath, and that kinesthetic experience through the hands, where we have so many nerve endings, can also help us become more focused in the present.
Thank you for that extra little nugget as we prepare to view another pearl of wisdom.
Another way to activate the relaxation response is through forward folding. When we fold forward, this begins to calm the nervous system, especially when pairing that movement with slow, deep breathing. You can amplify that relaxation response by putting some pressure on the area between the eyebrows, just slightly above them on the forehead. This is called the third eye in yoga. So you can fold forward from the hips, place your elbows on your knees, and let the knuckles of the thumb press into that third eye. Breathe slowly and deeply. An alternative is to fold the arms and rest them on a table or a desk and let the forehead rest on the forearm. Continue to keep a slow, deep rhythm of the breath. This will help activate the relaxation response.
Have you ever noticed that technology can be a stressor? Well, we're having a little of this right now. Our videos played crisply beforehand, but in the transfer it seems they've gotten a little blips. We're not just playing with your mind. Speaking of the mind, trauma can have a significant influence on the mind, and that affects the physiological responses in our brain and body. Barbara mentioned studying with David Emerson, and that she's also looking to present a trauma-sensitive training for teachers. So we'll ask Barbara to share a little bit more about this realm of trauma once Amnon gets back here and can switch the camera over to her. Oh wait, it's already on her. Okay, Barbara.
Thanks, Hal. Well, I was saying before that part of my inspiration to become a yoga teacher was actually the work I was doing with trauma survivors, and at a parallel process, my own developing yoga practice. When I first started practicing yoga, it was for the physical benefits of the practice, but I soon discovered it really did help my own approach to stress and increased my capacity to do something we often do in yoga classes that are more active, which is breathe through discomfort. So I attended a training with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's one of the in the forefront of researchers in trauma, and he spoke about experiments they were doing to determine whether yoga could in fact help people who are struggling with very severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And in fact, the results were quite beneficial. And he said these words, which were, yoga is an essential element of good therapy for people with trauma. And I felt like a light sort of shone down on me, like in the Blues Brothers. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what I need to do, is become a yoga teacher. So what we continue to learn is all of the many ways trauma affects the brain, and that in fact the yoga practices are incredibly helpful in changing the very parts of the brain that are activated when people are in a highly aroused state. Those technological challenges just keep coming, and I keep breathing deeply. So the work with trauma has been really near and dear to my heart, and it's been something that I've wanted to pass along to other people. So I'm planning to offer this program at Bliss Body Yoga Studio in a few weeks.
Fascinating. Also, some of our other board members of You Call This Yoga, of which Barbara is one, have taken trauma-sensitive training, and in our conversations, I've come to appreciate that styles of teaching can also be stress-inducing. Teachers, I've come to find that I could be very verbose and could be talking a whole lot more than is absolutely necessary. You should see the look Barbara's giving me now. Really?
I could have told you that many years ago.
True, but the wax wasn't removed yet. So talking can be a stressor. So teachers, not that I'm a 500 and can tell you what to do, but from my experience, talking too much can be a turnoff or a stressor. Similarly, I thought that assisting could be very helpful for people who are out of touch with their bodies. But in my readings and also conversations, I've come to learn that touching isn't always a good thing for people. And that just because I think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it is a good idea. So for teachers, I've come to notice that some studios now use a chip system where a person who may or may not want to be assisted indicates with a chip of some form, it could be a poker chip or whatever, to indicate that they don't want to be touched. This is important because our intention is to invite relaxation as opposed to agitation. Barbara, any other cues or indicators that you've come across in your travels that may be helpful for students and teachers to communicate better?
Well, I think one thing for teachers is to realize that trauma is more prevalent than you might know. And there's a good chance that in every single class you teach, there's someone, at least one someone, who's had some experience with trauma. It may not mean that they have a full-blown PTSD diagnosis, but you probably have all seen people who come to rest in Shavasana and their eyes are wide open, or their body is stiff, or they have a real struggle settling down. So one thing is just to be aware and to be welcoming and inviting for people to once again meet themselves where they are. Howie, you mentioned being too verbose as a problem, and it could be, but the other side of it is for some folks who may be very stressed, to have total silence in Shavasana can be very challenging, or in a relaxation pose. So again, inviting people's attention into their bodies to help them really feel their bodies engaged or feel what's happening on a sensory level can be very helpful, especially when there's a trauma history.
Mm-hmm.
And even when there isn't.
True. Also, in talking with Ramiro the other week, who is dealing with yoga warriors and members of the community who have experienced signs of PTSD, the languaging is a very significant part of
Yes.
communications and stress reductions. How do you suggest teachers approach their class from a languaging perspective to reduce stress? Any key words that you like to emphasize?
Well, I like the idea of inviting people to simply notice their experience. So to be careful about your command language. For example, rather than saying, you will feel this in your shoulders, or immediately your belly will start to relax. That may not be true for everyone. So instead, inviting them to be curious. Notice what's happening in your shoulders as you draw the shoulder blades in. You can invite them to experiment with something. So it allows them the freedom to have it be their own experience. I think to be clear and concise, and this is true really for all sorts of yoga, not only trauma sensitive, but especially, I think, when one is dealing with people whose connection to their own bodies can be somewhat difficult.
Mm-hmm. I can appreciate being in a class and dealing with my physical limitations and teachers guiding me and others along. And then there's a conflict because they'll suggest that some experience is about to happen or has happened and it hasn't happened in my body, which creates conflict, which can be a stressor for me and others who are wondering, well, this isn't happening. Am I doing something wrong? And it can create this spiraling of confusion and discomfort. I've come to find for my classes that I have to speak in very brief sentences because some of our students are mature or have some processing challenges, which therefore leads to a lag in integration from hearing to actually acting. So for teachers, consider brief sentences that are clear and concise, pausing between them, and taking a breath yourself so that you can have clarity of thoughts. Students, if something just doesn't feel right, I believe it's reasonable to let the teacher know without disrupting the class and sharing some of your perspectives so that you can have a more positive experience, which leads to the social experience of others too being positive. We're going to move to our next pearl for the day. Let's roll that next clip and hopefully we won't have any wah-wahs in it.
Meditation is another effective way to manage stress. You're practicing paying attention to what's happening right now. And one way to do that is to simply notice the breath, feeling the movement of the breath in the body. Or just noticing the sensations of breathing. You're paying attention to what is happening in the present. When doing that, though, it's very normal for the mind to wander. Every time you notice that you've wandered from the point of focus and come back, you're being present. It's not about quieting your mind. It's about noticing what's happening right now and meeting what's here with kindness.
Oh, that kindness. What a wonderful word, but how challenging it is to sustain that. I created a stressor for myself the other day. I don't know if this happened to you or ever happened, that I hastily started driving away before I closed the hatch on my car. Well, lo and behold, I drove that hatch into the car door, into the garage door. That wasn't very fun because I broke my car. And I had an appointment with our next guest for next week. So I therefore had to sort of shunt my stress response and get back into the present mode, which was, how am I going to get to my appointment? Well, through the magic of duct tape, I was able to fix my part temporarily and get to my appointment in a reasonable amount of time. My point being is that sometimes we just have to explore what are the options available while we're breathing so that we can take some sort of appropriate action. Viewers, any stress experiences that you have that you'd like to consult Dr. Vosk on? We have Computers 2K Voice for Skyping. We have 919-518-9773 for phone. You can type in the chat box and log in. You can email me at howie@youcallthisyoga.org, clicking the contact button below. And then Barbara will share how you might be able to reach her with some of your questions. Barbara, how can we reach you besides with two long arms?
Well, you can email me at bvoskphd@gmail.com, or my website is simply barbaravosk.com.
Would you repeat that?
Yes, my email, bvoskphd@gmail.com, and my website, www.barbaravosk.com.
Wonderful. You had mentioned about meditation. I teach a little bit of meditation in my classes to give people a sense of that so that they may apply it. I call that the 1-minute meditation. What are your recommendations for developing a stress-reducing meditation practice?
Well, I think the first thing is to have reasonable expectations. For so many people that I recommend this to, they immediately say, oh, I can't meditate, I can't quiet my mind, or I can't sit still. As I said in that little pearl, it really isn't about quieting your mind. But the findings, the research findings on meditation are so strong in terms of the benefits to our bodies and our brains and our capacity for empathy and compassion, that I invite people to start, really just as you were saying, with something that maybe lasts a minute or 2 or 3, and to practice and just try it. Because noticing what's happening in there, in that mind of ours that's always spinning, for most of us, that's the truth. And beginning to step out of that automatic process and notice the breath begins to change the brain, begins to interrupt those automatic patterns. And most importantly, it helps us separate from our thoughts. We become so identified with them, and to realize, oh, I'm worrying. Can I relax my body? And then in that moment, we're not worrying quite as much. So I invite folks to stack the deck for success. Start small, set a little timer, make sure you're comfortable. You do not have to be sitting on a cushion. You can sit in a chair. You can even lie down if you're unlikely to fall asleep. That can be a problem for beginning meditators and even more experienced meditators. And while it's very pleasant to nap, it isn't meditation. So like anything else, just start small, and if you can be consistent with it, I think you will experience the benefits.
And are there particular mantras or sayings that you would suggest for people to incorporate into their breathing and meditation?
Great question, Hal. I think there are many one can use. Again, I tend to like things to be simple. So something as simple as relax on the inhale, let go on the exhale. There's a lovely mantra by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is, I breathe in and I'm aware of breathing in. I breathe out and I'm aware of breathing out. What I'd also like to add is that there are many resources, podcasts, and applications for people who like guided meditations. So if it's easier to have someone else's voice in your head telling you kind of where to direct your attention, that's also quite legitimate and can be a lovely way to start. And in the realm of apps, there are some that invite you to, log your time, and you get stars if you've done it for 7 days in a row, that kind of thing. So if you like those approaches to behavior change, there's quite a lot out there. Worth the exploration.
Last week we had Marcy Braverman Goldstein on, and she was sharing the concept of peace or Shanti. So I'd invite viewers, teachers, experienced, inexperienced, to consider while you're viewing now and listening, just the idea of shanti for several breaths and to notice how that might have an impact on you. We can play with that while I'm chanting or chatting. Barbara mentioned about meditating while laying down. I often meditate laying down to go to sleep because I find that it does relax me. However, I also do meditate sitting up, and I often can waver from my breathing and thinking. But that's the beauty of meditating, is allowing yourself the kindness and compassion to realize, oh, I've deviated, oh, I'm coming back. And know it's okay, because there really isn't a consequence to this. And I think that's what the stress response might invoke, is this fear that some consequence is going to happen. What are your thoughts, Barbara, about the concept of consequences? How often do these consequences from stress really occur?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, but I would say most of the time the things we're worrying about don't actually happen. I often say to folks that anticipatory anxiety is usually way worse than the event that we're anxious about. That's certainly true for me appearing on this television show today, for example. So once again, noticing that we tend to go into the future, and it's a very natural human response of our brain to be scanning for danger. That's a survival mechanism. But because we're human, the danger can be in the form of not physical danger, but things like embarrassment or feeling insecure or feeling unsure of ourselves. So very often those are beliefs that may be very separate from what the reality of the experience is. And that is one way that meditation can help us break up that pattern of being so caught up in our thinking process that we forget what's actually happening right now. And once we come back to the now over and over again, it gives us a little more choice in our responding. So when we start to worry, it may be a little easier to say, oh, I'm worrying. Well, just come back. That hasn't happened yet, as you like to say. You're creating a solution for a problem that hasn't occurred yet, which sometimes is good planning, but other times is making yourself much more stressed than needed.
Yes, we may not need plan B, C, D, E, and F. So I can appreciate that. So in review, we'd like to have Barbara share her upcoming program for teachers and lay community that's happening in a couple weeks. Barbara, can you clarify that?
Sure. I'll be offering this workshop at Bliss Body Yoga on Lake Boone Trail in Raleigh. It's trauma-sensitive yoga teaching for yoga teachers. And it will be 2 sessions. There'll be a session on Saturday, I believe it's March 10th, from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And then on Sunday, March 11th, from 1:30 to 3 o'clock.
Wonderful.
And I also teach a regular restorative class at Bliss Body Yoga at 4 o'clock on Sunday. And that is the class that's especially helpful for people seeking stress management and relaxation.
And then Barbara, could you tell us a little bit more about this yoga festival that you have attended and taught in the past and will be this coming April 8th?
Do you mean Yoga Fest?
Why, yes.
NC?
Uh-huh.
Is this the time I'm supposed to hold up the postcard?
Please.
Okay, here we go. It's Yoga Fest Raleigh. No, it's Yoga Fest NC. This is a beautifully, wonderfully exciting event. This is our 6th year, Howie?
Yes, it is.
6th year, and we've had close to 400 or 500 participants, classes offered all through the day, many different genres, lunches included, and it's just an energizing, exciting, loving community to be a part of. And I invite each of you to check it out and register and come to Yoga Fest.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara's a regular teacher there because she has a lot to offer in terms of the mind, the body, and the heart. Sometimes coming to a yoga festival can also be stressful. So we encourage people to buddy up if at all possible, or you can contact me to learn more about how to have an easier experience. We do have scholarships for those in need or are curious and just unfamiliar with yoga. Please reach out to us. You can visit our Facebook page, You Call This Yoga, and look at the events. Registration is open. In terms of our show, we have next week coming on, pardon my English, Carol Krukoff, who will be sharing Yoga for Seniors. Carol is a yoga therapist at Duke Integrative Medicine who teaches a Yoga for Seniors program with her cohort, Kimberly Carson. So let's plan to check in next week and learn about some nuances and grand ideas about Yoga for Seniors. This week, we want to thank Dr. Barbara Vosk, Ph.D. and RYT 500, and my good fortune of having her as my wife for 33 plus years. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing your insights and your experiences. It's been a joy prepping this program with you and seeing how we manage our stress together.
Thanks, Howie. I'm thrilled to be here and really proud of your efforts to bring this message out into the world.
Thank you. And we thank Neomon Deli and Catering for joining us as an annual sponsor as well as sponsor for our show. We look forward to seeing you soon. Namaste.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.